Good morning, everybody. I want to start our chapter on square roots today. First of all, we want to talk about what the definition of a square root is. So what a square root is when you can take a number and you can multiply it times itself. So 7 times 7, we get 49. So what we would say is the square root of 49 is equal to 7 because 7 times 7, or 7 squared, is equal to 49. So determine the square roots of a given number. So if I just give you a 64 and I don't give you this symbol, the square root symbol, I'm just looking for the square roots. Well, we could take 8 times 8 and we could get 64. But we could also take negative 8 times negative 8 and get a positive 64. So the square roots of 64 would be 8 and negative 8. So let's look down here. So if I have 81, what two numbers multiply to get me 81? Well, I could have 9 times 9, or I could have negative 9 times negative 9. So 9 and negative 9 would be my square roots of 81. Now negative 81. Now I'm trying to take a number and multiply it times itself to get this ending number. So if I took 9 times 9, I'm getting positive 81. If I do negative 9 times negative 9, I'm also getting positive 81. That's what we just did. There's no way I can take a number and multiply it by times itself and get a negative number. So this one has no square roots because it's negative. And we'll be talking more about that as we move through the chapter. So all positive numbers have two square roots. A number b is a square root if a equals b squared. So I'm looking for the number that you square it and to get that a number. All right, so 49. Well, what times what equals 49? 7 and negative 7. So 7 times 7 and negative 7 times negative 7. Again, negative 49 would have no square roots because it's negative. And 16, well, 16 is 4 times 4, or negative 4 times negative 4. So 4 and negative 4 would be the roots for 16. Okay, let's look at the next page. Now we've got this symbol. So once we have the symbol, and I don't just give you the number, I'm looking for the positive, oops, the positive roots once I start giving you this symbol. So if I take the square root of 64, that means I want the positive root, so I want the positive 8. Now suppose we have a fraction. If we have a fraction, we do the numerator and then we do the denominator. So when you have a fraction underneath the square root symbol, it's still going to be a fraction for your answer. So the square root of 25 is 5 times 5, so 5 is on top. The square root of 49 is 7 times 7, so 7 on the bottom. I can't reduce 5 over 7. Now, this brings me to something in your, I have given you a perfect root handout. That will be something that you need to print off because if you don't have a good calculator, I have the main roots on that sheet, and it's a great sheet to have. You can use that on your test because it's just it has all your roots on there. It's got not only square roots, it's got cube roots, fourth roots. I believe it goes all the way to sixth roots. You can also find some of those online as well. So keep that in mind as we're going through. And I'll talk more about using the perfect square handout sheet when we get to problems that are not necessarily all perfect squares. All right, so moving on, square root of negative 4. If you have a negative under the square root, that is no square roots. Now, we will learn later on what happens when you have a negative in there. So this one is really no real number for an answer. Now, I can have a negative on the outside of the square root. That's okay. So, because it just means the opposite of. So if I have negative square root of 4, well, let's take the square root of 4. Well, square root of 4 is 2 times 2, so square root of 4 would be 2. I have a negative out front, so that's going to carry with me, so I can get a negative number there. If we have something like 0.36, then we think about what times what would be equal to 0.36. Well, that would be equal to 0.6. This is where a calculator is going to come in handy. A good calculator with square root buttons. Oops. All right, let's move right along. All right, we can simplify the expressions. The square root of 10,000. What do you think it's going to be? Well, that would be equal to 100. Negative the square root of 1/4. Well, the square root of 1 is just 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. The square root of 4 would be 2. The negative will carry because it's on the outside. And then this last one, the square root of 0.25 is going to be 0.5, or just 0.5. Look over here at this example, square root of 0, that equals 0. That's something to keep in mind as well. All right, find the third root of 8. So here's some different roots, and here's where that square root page, the perfect root page, is going to come in handy. The third root of 8. So if I'm going to write that, that looks like that. The third root of 8. So I need to think about what number times itself again gives me an 8. Well, 2 times 2 times 2 would give me an 8. So the third root of 8 is equal to 2. The fourth root of 81, if I'm writing that out, it looks like that. So I need to think about what number times itself would give me 81. Well, 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 gives me 81. So there's 4 of those 3, so that means that the fourth root of 81 would be equal to 3. We're not going to have a lot of higher roots in this chapter. We're going to deal with a lot of square roots and then a few cube roots thrown in there. So again, here's your summary. If n is a positive even integer and a is greater than 0, then the square root of that is the positive root. Okay. If n is greater than 1 and is an odd, then the positive root is the nth root of a. The root of 0, doesn't matter what it is, it's always going to be equal to 0. So let's think about negative 125. With third roots, square roots I couldn't do a negative number, but with third roots I can do a negative number. It's going to be negative 125 under there. Because when I multiply 3 numbers, I can get a negative number. So in this case, 5 times 5 times 5 equals 125. That's positive. So does negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5 equal negative 125? Well, negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. Positive 25 times a negative 25 gives me the negative 25. So the cube root in negative 25 would be negative 5. So you can do negatives as long as you have odd roots. Even roots, you can't do negatives. All right, so now, if you see over here, this looks, it gives you kind of the perfects like I give you on the sheet that I'm asking you to print out. So it gives you a perfect squares over here, your perfect cubes, and your perfect fourths. So we can come over there and we can look. If we've got 64, the square root of 64, you find 64 over here on the equal part. There's 64. Its base is an 8, so that means the square root of 64 is 8. Now, be careful because see this says cube root of 64. That 3 right there in the pocket means cube root of 64. So look in the cube list. 64 also appears in the cube list, and its base in this case is a 4. So with 64, it's a number that appears more than once. 81 is also a number that appears in 2 different lists, so you got to watch that one as well. I'm not going to do all of these because we're not doing higher roots in our homework. But if you have Square root of -1, we can't do that, so that's not a real number. Sometimes you'll hear me say narn. That's not a real number. Anytime you try to take an even root of a negative number, that's going to be not a real number. So even though that's a fourth root, it's a negative underneath there. Even powers can't be taken. But now I could do the cube root of -1 because -1 times -1 times -1 equals that -1. So this would be equal to -1. Let's do 16. Fourth root of -16. Can't do that one because it's an even root. But I can do fourth root if the negative's on the outside. So fourth root, 16, here's the fourth power list. Its base is 2, so that would be equal to 2, and the negative would carry over and give me a -2. Let's look at this fraction down here. The cube root of -127. So the cube root of 1 is going to, or -1 is going to be -1. And then the cube root of 27, here's 27, its base is 3, so that'd be -1/3. You can do the decimal ones on your calculator and make it much easier. All right, that's enough with the numbers. I'm going to stop the video now and I'll do variables next, but I think that's good for numbers. Y'all have a wonderful day.